I'm Bear with BearIndependent.com. Today we're going to do the brief. We're also going to look at some lessons learned from this ongoing conflict in Ukraine for preparedness-minded individuals. If you're new here, subscribe and ring the little bell. That way you can stay in touch with us. We will have an increasing frequency of briefs given the amount of conflict that is taking place over in Eastern Europe currently. Additionally, we'll be offering even more insight on Patreon, patreon.com. Search for Bear Independent. You'll find us there. It's a couple bucks a month. Best money you can spend on the internet. Shalom to all the patrons and everybody in the chat. Bear Independent Brief, 25 February 22. Predictions continue to come to pass. The Biden administration and its Western allies unfurled sanctions against Russia because of this new war. Targets include an additional 4 large Russian banks, new export controls, and sanctions specifically for Russian oligarchs, excluding Putin. President Biden has said the new sanctions would, quote, limit Russia's ability to do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen to be part of the global economy. End quote. In addition to this, the U.S. has also issued sanctions against Belarus for its role in the invasion, and at least 7,000 U.S. troops have recently, 7,000 additional U.S. troops have recently received orders to go to Europe. Now, many analysts and commentators are saying that cruise missiles move faster than sanctions do, and I agree with this 100%. Frankly, I think sanctions are a sign of weakness. However, as long as the conflict remains confined to Ukraine, sanctions out of the NATO and UN allies are likely all that we are going to see as far as air quote conflict between East and West is concerned. An interesting narrative may be about to unfold if Biden's comments are any indication. Biden stated he believes that Vladimir Putin, quote, has much larger ambitions, end quote, than just Ukraine, saying, quote, he wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union, end quote, which is correct. Biden has said this on many an occasion. The invasion is the largest in Europe since World War II. Major cities are under attack. Ukraine declared martial law and offered weapons to anyone who wished to defend the country, though citizens attempting to escape the conflict are flooding the roads. So far, analysts believe this war could become very costly in both terms of money and blood. The Wall Street Journal reported, quote, Russian President Vladimir Putin has shattered the security architecture that has prevailed in Europe since the end of the Cold War, and no one knows what will take its place, end quote. So far, Russian troops have secured the Chernobyl plant and surrounding territory, which, brief interjection, radiological scans of the air around the Chernobyl exclusion zone are showing an increase in the amount of radioactivity in the air. We're not entirely sure why that is, although it's been posited by several analysts, including S2 Underground, which is a phenomenal channel. If you're not checking them out, you should be. That if you were to impact a region, say with MRLS, multiple rocket launcher systems, that in of itself could kick up a whole bunch of dust and disturb the area. In fact, what they're designed to do is erase grid squares on a map. So yeah, they certainly disturb an area. Ukraine's President Zelensky tweeted, quote, Russian occupation forces are trying to seize the Chernobyl NPP. And now, in fact, they have, in the time that has transpired since that tweet. Our defenders are giving their lives so that the tragedy of 1986 will not be repeated. Reported this to the Swedish Prime Minister. This is a declaration of war against the whole of Europe, end quote. So we can see here that Ukraine's President Zelensky is trying to receive support from outside of his country's borders, not just military aid support, weapons and equipment, but they are looking for boots on the ground, which, if that happens, my opinion, this conflict goes way bigger than it is currently. Should we be afraid? No, we should not be afraid. We are commanded to fear nothing but our Father in heaven, Yahuwah our Elohim. Everything else is of the enemy. However, we're also told to be wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove. And so we should be tracking these threat indicators from halfway around the world because they certainly can affect us here. We're going to be talking a little bit about that further on in the brief. In reaction to the invasion, the U.S. stock market plummeted as oil prices skyrocketed. Oil reached $100 a barrel at one point. Then, after Western powers restrained themselves from issuing even more potent sanctions, the markets rallied again. And this is incredibly important to understand. The stronger our sanctions are against Russia, the more it weakens the market. And so, because the market is already weak and the U.S. economy is already weak, there's only so many tools in our toolkit regarding sanctions that we can employ at one time without suffering the consequences of crashing our own market. Yeah, because everything is enmeshed at this point. According to PBS, quote, now that war has broken out, and it's important to understand that this is a war now, this is not a conflict, this is not an invasion, it's not an incursion, it is a war in Ukraine. Now that war has broken out, the biggest costs for the U.S. will likely be in higher prices, on top of what is already the fastest pace of inflation in 40 years. How much worse inflation could get will depend on how far Putin goes, the severity of the sanctions placed on Russia, and how long the crisis lasts. Will Putin cut off oil or gas to Europe? Will the invasion thoroughly disrupt Ukraine's ability to export food and other products to the rest of the world? End quote. Since Ukraine is called the breadbasket of Europe, and since Europe is so dependent on Russian oil, this means that prices will shoot up across Europe. Nothing exists in a vacuum anymore, so this will also affect the U.S., where gas pump prices will skyrocket. I have seen many an analyst saying to expect by Easter of this year, which is not that far away, gas to be $6 to $7 per gallon at the pump. Will that materialize? I don't know. We're going to find out. The Ukraine produces 16% of the world's corn and 12% of its wheat. Russia produces 12% of the world's oil and 17% of the world's natural gas. Europe gets about half of its natural gas supply from Russia alone. Thus, Europe will be more immediately affected than the U.S. by oil and gas, but food exports tend to be more widespread in the global markets, so the U.S. will likely see more of those impacts more quickly. Previously, economists predicted that the U.S. could experience an increase from 7.5% inflation up to 10% in the event of an invasion. Also incredibly important to understand that when those inflation numbers are calculated, they do not include the cost of food or the cost of energy. And so other analysts have more succinctly put that actual inflation rate of closer to 20% here in the United States of America. And moving on up. If the Federal Reserve acts to quell the flames of increasing inflation, that could be enough to trigger an economic recession. If the Federal Reserve acts to quell the flames of increasing inflation, that could be enough to trigger an economic recession. Because of the ripple effect around the globe, it's possible that an air quote meaningful slowdown could also occur in the global economy. Essentially, there is currently a balancing act between action against Russia and the economic blowback for Americans already straining under inflation. During the announcements of sanctions on yesterday, Biden said, quote, I know this is hard and that Americans are already hurting. I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. But this aggression cannot go unanswered. If we did, the consequences for America would be much worse, end quote. And there is rumor of Biden suspending the federal gas tax to help bring down the cost at the pump. However, if he did, that would only equate to approximately 17 cents per gallon. So, not much of a savings there. And there's a lot of talk that between the canceling of the Keystone XL pipeline here in America and this war in Ukraine, and we all know whose son was involved in Ukraine during the most recent presidential election, And it's easy to see the writing on the wall, to see what is actually going on there. We all know that 17 cents at the gallon ain't nothing, at the pump rather, 17 cents per gallon, and that there are bigger moves being made here. My opinion, the Democrats have wanted a war with Russia for a long time, and I think they might finally get it. I also know from history that conflict, specifically conflict in other countries outside the United States of America, has been historically good for the economy of the United States. And it wouldn't surprise me if part of why we see this buildup in Ukraine and NATO Western forces allying along the borders of Ukraine isn't so that we can prop up our economy via the military-industrial complex. However, good men and women will die if that's the case. Are we there yet? No. Is it possible? Yes. Absolutely something to keep an eye on. As a reminder, this military conflict has the potential to expand, which would exacerbate and expand the consequences and risks beyond just expensive oils and commodities, inflation, and recession. President Zelensky of Ukraine said, quote, "This step can become a beginning of a great war at the European continent," end quote. And William Cohen, former U.S. Defense Secretary, told CNN, quote, "Starting a war in a dry place, so to speak, can set off a wildfire," end quote. Now, if you're on Patreon, you have the relevant links. If you're not on Patreon, you do not. So, I'm going to read a little bit of the news, understanding that every news outlet has its own particular spin, and that's okay. We will decipher that as we move along. There are massive amounts of on-the-ground reporting coming out of Ukraine currently, so much so that I have been drinking through a fire hose when it comes to OSINT, open source intelligence. Also, human intelligence. Got a lot of good contact from a lot of people who are in the region. People who have been emailing intel@bearindependent.com for the dance monkeys. If you have actual intel, and by this I don't mean a Fox News article or something from Reuters or AP or BBC, but actual boots on the ground intel, email intel@bearindependent.com. From the war zone, the first full night of fighting between Russia and Ukraine is underway. Russian forces have captured the now-defunct Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, the site of the infamous nuclear disaster in 1986, and detained the personnel working there as part of their invasion of Ukraine. This is just one area of Ukrainian territory now under the Kremlin's control as the country enters its first full night of this new conflict launched by its eastern neighbor. Ukrainian officials had earlier warned that fighting around Chernobyl and elsewhere inside the radiation-contaminated exclusion zone that surrounds the site could have severe environmental impacts for the region and the rest of Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier termed Russia's military action in the area, in particular, as a declaration of war on the whole of Europe. And again, understand that that could be used as a catalyst to get more nations involved in this conflict. A declaration of war on the whole of Europe. It's unclear what specifically drove Russia to capture the plant, but it lies in a potentially strategic area that presents the most convenient path of advance towards the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Earlier this month, a pontoon bridge had briefly appeared in satellite imagery spanning a section of the Pripyat River inside the Polessy State Radiological Reserve, a companion exclusion zone in Belarus to the north, underscoring the possibility of using the area as a key vector of attack and potential of fighting there during any future Russian invasion. Now, additionally, a lot of the on-the-ground reporting is showing that the Russian forces operating within Ukraine seem to be, they're not going whole hog. They're using as little force as possible. And this has some analysts stymied. Conservation of forces is a thing, right? Sometimes we don't use a Sledgehammer, when attack hammer will do the job. Other jobs require a sledgehammer. And it could indicate the fact that Russia is not spending the entirety of their forces in the initial attack, that they are, and this is just an indicator, it's just a possibility, that they are planning for a more long-term conflict in the region by not spending themselves in an initial shock and awe blitzkrieg type attack. Although, frankly, they're making incredible progress. Also, the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military are putting up more of a fight than apparently Russia expected. Do I think in a long-term sustained battle that Ukraine can withstand Russia? I do not. That is why I believe that Zelensky is trying to get as many other nations involved as possible, because time is not on the side of the Ukrainians. Time is on the side of the Russians. Also from the war zone, Ukraine strikes back. Russian airfield near border set ablaze. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is entering its second day with another massive barrage of strikes targeting Kiev. There are unconfirmed reports that as many as 40 cruise missiles and ballistic missiles have pounded the Ukrainian capital. It's not entirely clear what kinds of missiles may have been employed, but you can read more about it here, and they have a hyperlink. There are conflicting reports about a major explosion that was seen in the sky over the Ukrainian capital. An advisor to the country's interior minister, Anton Gerashenko, reportedly said that Ukrainian air defenses had shot down either an aircraft or a missile. CNN, citing Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, reported that it was a Ukrainian Su-27 flanker fighter jet that was shot down by a Russian surface-to-air missile. Right now, we just can't say for certain. And a lot of this is coming out on Twitter and social media from reporting on the ground. Earlier, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky had also defiantly refused to flee, despite saying he is the Kremlin's #1 target. Quote, "They want to destroy Ukraine politically by destroying the head of state," end quote, Zelensky said in an earlier televised address from an undisclosed location in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, adding that he and his family were not leaving. Quote, "We have information that enemy sabotage groups have entered Kiev," end quote. Now, it's my opinion that within a week, Russia will have a puppet state set up in Ukraine. This is a regime change because Zelensky opposes Russia. Russia will take the landmass as in this peacekeeping mission, as they call it. They will institute their own form of governance there, and they will put a figurehead in place that's sympathetic with Moscow. They do not want Ukraine to become a NATO ally. They also do not want neighbors on their border that oppose the Russian way of life. They consider it an existential threat to their existence. There's also interesting conversations right now around Finland and Sweden and Norway potentially joining NATO. Now, that's not an overnight process, but it's important to understand that Finland shares a border with Russia, and Finland and Russia have an over 100-year history of dislike, if not disdain, for one another. They have killed a lot of each other over the last 100 years. And that, if that was to come to pass, specifically Finland puts another NATO ally right on Russia's border. And so, big picture, macro, these are things to be aware of because they matter on the strategic battlefield of life. Let's see, what else we got? Zelensky also criticized NATO and its members for refusing to publicly say whether or not Ukraine would ever be admitted to the alliance. Quote, "Everyone is afraid and does not answer," he said, "and we are not afraid. We are not afraid of anything," end quote. On the battlefield so far, Ukrainian forces have appeared to have had some success in frustrating Russian advances on multiple fronts. The UK Ministry of Defense has said that there are indications that Russia's military did not meet its day one objectives despite having made significant territorial gains, including the capture of the now-defunct Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The U.S. military has given its own assessment that the Ukrainians are very actively fighting back as well. After holding the line against ground assaults on multiple fronts while also losing ground in other areas earlier today, which followed barrages of air and missile strikes as well as artillery fire, Ukrainian forces had already continued to fight into the night and are reported to have launched counterattacks in some areas. In one particularly notable example, Ukrainian troops were reportedly able to retake Hostomel Airport near Kiev, which currently hosts the only flying example of the Antonov 225 Miura, one of the world's largest aircraft, after a pitched back-and-forth battle with Russian paratroopers. Russia clearly saw this airfield as a critical staging location for operations near Kiev. Russian troops had still been able to make important gains, including in and around the site of the now-defunct Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Satellite imagery taken earlier today shows that Russian forces, possibly in cooperation with Belarusian counterparts, erected a pontoon bridge over the Pripyat River in Belarus in order to effect that movement south into Ukraine. Satellite images from earlier this month had shown a similar bridge spanning a section of river in the same general location, highlighting this area as a potential vector for advance as part of a larger Russian invasion. Now, if you were to pull out a map of Ukraine, you could also note that, and perhaps I'll be able to do this for you, that the attacks that have taken place in Ukraine thus far are all over the map. All over the map. They're not confined to one region of Ukraine. So it's actually in part for me, and I was discussing this last night on the live stream last night, which I would encourage you to go watch if you haven't. Thirsty Thursday Q&A from last night. It's interesting to me to watch clinically, to observe, because this is the first large-scale conventional ground warfare effort we have seen in 70 years in Europe. And the Russians are doctrinally doing what they ought to do. And the Ukrainians, to the extent that they're able to put up a resistance, are. And so we're seeing conventional forces facing partisan forces. And it's fascinating, honestly. Taking all the emotion out of it, all the right and wrong out of it, it's fascinating to watch, and there are myriad lessons that one can learn from this, which we're going to touch on momentarily. From RT.com, Anonymous, the hacking group, declares cyber war against Russia. RT.com has also been targeted in what appears to have been a widespread denial of service attack. The hacker collective Anonymous has declared a cyber war against Russia, claiming to have disabled several Russian government websites and that of RT. RT being Russia Today, which is a quasi-governmental propaganda wing of the Russian government, which again, anytime we read reporting from a major media outlet, we have to understand that they are all, to a greater or lesser extent, a propaganda arm of something. So, Hacker Collective Anonymous has declared a cyber war against Russia, claiming to have disabled several Russian government websites and that of RT. Social media accounts claiming to represent the group announced on Thursday evening that they were, quote, officially in a cyber war against the Russian government, end quote, and had taken down dozens of websites in response to the country's military action in Ukraine. The websites of the Russian government, the Kremlin, the Duma, which is the upper house of their parliament, the Ministry of Defense, and RT were all affected by the apparent cyber attack, with some of the websites slowing down and others being taken offline for extended periods throughout the day. Quote, effing Putin, we support the people of Ukraine. We are Legion. We will not forget the lives that have been lost under Putin's regime, tweeted one account related to the collective, while another account wrote, quote, the Putin criminal regime are going to have a very hard time recovering from our attacks, end quote. In another post, an account claiming to represent Anonymous said that while its operations were targeting the Russian government, there was also, quote, an inevitability that the private sector will most likely be affected too, end quote. So, quote, while people around the globe smash your internet providers to bits, understand that it's entirely directed at the actions of the Russian government and Putin, the account said in a message to the Russians. As a decentralized collective, Anonymous does not have any central hierarchy or leadership, and thus its operations have been known to take on a wide range of issues from different political perspectives. Hackers affiliated with Anonymous have previously attacked U.S. government websites, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Westboro Baptist Church, ISIS, the Church of Scientology, and the Epilepsy Foundation, among many others. So, interesting consideration here. Not only are they're attacking Russia with these cyber attacks, but they're openly admitting that by denying service to certain elements on the internet, that may also affect you. We know that Ukraine also, and this is very interesting, Zelensky yesterday, the president of Ukraine, made a call via Twitter for all of the underground hackers, quote unquote, in Ukraine to join the resistance and to target Russia. Russia also, it's highly suspected that as this war continues, that any nation that gets involved in support of Ukraine in this conflict will fall victim to Russian cyber attacks. And so this turns into the denial of service attacks. This turns into essentially interruptions in service and logistical issues and critical infrastructure issues, potentially here in the United States of America and in Europe. And for many of us, it's winter. It's 16 degrees and windy here today. I'm not entirely happy about it, but I got a job to do, which is talk to y'all. So, again, something to be aware of. And this is basic prepper stuff. How long can you go without going to the store? Because that's essentially what it comes down to. How long can you go without going to the store? Now, from RT, the last article we're going to look at this morning before we draw some conclusions, counter sanctions against the West to hit its, quote, weak spots, says Moscow. Moscow will not mirror the West's fresh restrictions, but will hit the, air quote, weak spots of the U.S. and its allies. Moscow will respond to sanctions imposed by the U.S. and its allies over Russia's military operations in Ukraine. The head of the Russian Senate, Valentina Matveyenko, told journalists during her visit to Tajikistan on Friday. Quote, "As for the reciprocal sanctions, they are ready," Matveyenko said, adding that Russia's response would not mirror the restrictions imposed by Washington and its allies, but would instead hit the Western nations where it hurts. Quote, "We are well aware of the West's weak spots, and we have drafted an entire package, a series of potential sanctions to be used against those nations that announce sanctions against Russia," the Senate head said, adding that, quote, "The West has many soft spots." Officials have not elaborated on the details of the drafted sanction proposal. She said only that the measures would be designed so as to not hurt Russia herself. The Russian government, quote, "has taken all the threats stemming from sanctions into account and developed safety mechanisms," which is something we've talked about for a long time. And as I've said previously, I've said for months, Russia's going to get Ukraine. I believe that was decided on the geopolitical stage months, if not years ago. Russia's going to get Ukraine. And the fact that we were going to sanction them, in many cases, we've already given out the playbook. This is a dance. This is a song and dance. Russia knew sanctions were coming, and I guarantee you they knew what sanctions were coming. If they weren't directly told what sanctions were coming, they're not idiots. They war-gamed this thing, and they certainly had an idea of what sanctions were going to be coming their way. And so it shouldn't surprise us that they have counter-sanctions prepared for us. And the game of sanctions versus counter-sanctions, like I said, sanctions move a lot more slowly than cruise missiles do. As long as we stay in the realm, we globally stay in the realm of sanctions and counter-sanctions, we're looking at a frustrating perhaps, but otherwise minimally impactful outfall from this conflict in Ukraine. If it turns into U.S./NATO military involvement in the region inside of the Ukrainian border, there is the potential for, and Vladimir Putin himself has said he has authorized his generals to use any and all means necessary to respond, which is a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we will nuke your ass. And that's what has most people on edge. And that's why I think, other than the fact that the President of the United States of America is incapable of being forceful with his rhetoric because he's an 80-year-old ice cream-loving maniac, that's why we don't see strong rhetoric out of the United States of America right now. And if you follow the State Department's feed on Twitter and Instagram, it's abhorrent. It's all fluff. Antony Blinken should be ashamed of himself, but that's an entirely different conversation. So, now, let's look at some lessons. Briefly, let's look at some lessons that we can learn as preparedness-minded individuals. I don't like the term prepper. Because preppers buy shit, they put it on a shelf, and then they call it good. And if you don't know how to use the stuff that's on a shelf, you're going to find yourself in a position like many Ukrainians are right now, where you actually need the skills and the talents and the abilities that go with that stuff in order for it to have any efficacy. So lesson 1 from Ukraine, leave early. There's many people trying to leave right now. We've known for months that this was coming. For months we've known that this was coming. And we all saw the reports that people in Kiev, people in Kharkiv, people in Odessa, people in Mariupol, people in Lviv were simply just carrying on with their daily lives. In fact, yesterday in Ukraine, there were citizens trying to go to work while Russians were coming across their borders in T-90 tanks and BMP T-72 Terminators. And MRLS rockets are falling and hitting the ground. They're still trying to go to work. Can you say normalcy bias? Leave early. So what does this mean for you? How good is your bug out plan? Not just your bug out bag. Your bug out bag is part of your bug out kit, right? Which is based upon your bug out location, which is based upon your bug out plan. So what's your bug out plan? Dust it off and look at it. And if you don't have one written down, write it down. Where are you going? What are you doing? Because if all that intellectual property lives in your head and you break your leg or catch a bullet to the dome, nobody else in your crew is going to know what to do and where to go. Also, what are your threat indicators? If this, then this. I hear all the time people who are fortunate enough have made the correct moves to live in a place like this where I live. I'm not leaving. I already live in my bug out location. Negative. If I found out 2 towns over that there was a Russian armored column over there, I'm not going to stay here and fight because I don't want to be picking up the pieces of my son out of the front yard when one of those missiles hits. Okay? That's overwhelming force. Overwhelming force absolutely should be a threat indicator. So you have to have a place to go, and you need to know when you're going to go and how you're going to get there. Lesson 2, have things like fuel and cash on hand. Banks don't work. There's people standing in line trying to get cash out of the bank. How's that going to go for them? Not well. Can't get fuel because there's no electricity in a lot of cases, or they're simply out. And so having logistical things on hand like that, fuel, cash, other important things, have it on hand now. And this is very basic stuff, but gosh dang, so many people miss this. Go fill your fuel cans. Have some cash on hand. Know where you're going. Know when you're going and why you're going. Lesson 3, your intel network and your commo can save lives. Part of when to leave is knowing when to check off your threat indicators. Well, the Russians are driving their vehicles down the streets of your city, which, by the way, where are the Russians attacking? The cities, the built-up areas, the populated areas. I hear all the time, well, Bear, they're going to, if there's conflict, it's going to come to you too. Yeah, but not first, because we are very, very low on the totem pole, right? There's a low population density. You want to take the key population density areas, the key population centers first, right? It's basic strategy. And so where is Russia attacking? Kharkiv, Kiev, Lviv, Odessa, Mariupol, where the people are. Not out here. Not yet. They're not out in the country. They're not maneuvering through the woods and, through the hayfields. They're taking the roads into the cities. And while they're doing that, they're actively jamming signals. They're actively jamming signals. Their commo works, but everybody else's commo doesn't. And so you should have a commo plan: pace, primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. However, commo is not simply a radio and knowing how to use it. There are multiple facets to commo. And having your intel network that's feeding you intel so that you can make decisions on the ground, on the fly, to protect the lives of you and your loved ones is incredibly important. Somebody is going to be producing intel. Trust me when I tell you that when shit hits the fan, everybody scrambles for information. And so either you are developing your own or you're getting it from somebody else. And developing your own dovetailed into the intel that's being put out, the information that's being put out by everybody else. When you compare that against your area study and your bug out indicators, gives you a good operational snapshot of the battlefield so that you can make the best decisions to preserve the lives of yourself and your loved ones. So intel, network, and commo saves lives. Lesson number 4, overwhelming force. Live to fight another day. It's awesome that you have level 4 plates in your plate carrier, and you've got an AK, and you've got this, and you've got that, and you've got a blowout kit from Refuge Medical. All that stuff is awesome. Cool. When your block is one of the grids that's being erased by an MRLS, multiple rocket launcher system, and your buddies are laying in piles to the left and the right of you, it doesn't matter how cool guy your cool guy stuff is. It's overwhelming force. And I've heard many people in the prepper community say, I'm going to stay right here and fight to the death. That's exactly what you're going to do. If you stay right here, you're going to fight to the death. I see that there's a lot going around this morning of the 13 guys that were on that island who were hailed by the Russian warship. This is a Russian warship. And they said, hey, F you, Russian warship. And all 13 of those guys were killed. Now the question becomes at that point, could they have left? Probably not. Could they have surrendered? Maybe. I don't know what their heart condition and their mindset was at that point, and maybe that was the right thing for them to do at that time. But I'm telling you this, with my wife and my kids and my loved ones, I'm not going to stand on this hill and die on top of it if I can get my people out. Again, I'm not going to pick my son's guts up off the ground. This is overwhelming force. And it doesn't matter how well trained you are, how good your equipment is. If it's 9 of you and your AKs versus an armored column, you got to go. You got to go. Live to fight another day. And it doesn't mean that you can't take on that armored column. You know, a couple of anti-tank guided missiles, right? 4 of them, you find that armored column, you got 2 to 4, missiles. Cool. You take out the front tank and the back tank, and now they're boxed in, and then you plan your counter assault, right? Ambush, partisan tactics, guerrilla tactics. There are ways, but standing on the hill so that you can get blown to bits is not the way. Lesson 5, lines of drift. Civilian refugees, where are they going to go? Because there is a huge refugee crisis that is being created because of this war in Ukraine. Where are you on those lines of drift? I mean, currently, on the map, geographically speaking, how are you situated on those lines of drift? Where is there going to be a mass exodus of people that now you have to deal with not only the war, but those people as well? What are your lines of drift? This comes back to your area study. Do a damn area study. I have videos on it. Prepper Classroom here on YouTube, Bear Independent channel. Forward Observer has some great videos on doing area studies and developing threat indicators as well. You have to do that, and you need to understand the human factor on the battlefield, lines of drift. Where are these people? How are these people going to end up in your grill? And what consequences are you going to suffer because of it? Lesson 6, continuity of government, not continuity of community. The government does not care about you. In a conflict, the government can maybe take care of itself. It does not care about you. And there's a lot of hay being made right now that the Ukrainian government is handing out AKs to its citizenry, asking them to defend the motherland. Awesome. That's great. Cool. Lots of people are going, look, see how important the Second Amendment is, see how important it is for the people to have weapons. Yeah, I agree completely. What are they defending? They're defending their homeland. The government is handing them AKs and mags and crates of ammo and going, best of luck, y'all. We're out. Continuity of government, not continuity of community. They're not coming to save you, and dare I say, they're not coming to enslave you. They're not coming. They don't care. And they don't have the resources in the conflict to take care of you. So, from a preparedness standpoint, do not at all think that the government is going to show up to help. They're not. Their hands are full, and they're not worried about you. And lesson 7, you will be in a group. I hear from all you lone preppers, lone wolf preppers out there. I'm not in a group. I can't find a group. I don't want to join a group. Everybody else is an asshole. I'm going to go it alone. Guess what's happening in Ukraine right now? People are grouping up. Whether they're groups predicated on geography, this is my neighbor, whether they're groups predicated on family, this is my cousin, or they're pre-existing groups, mutual assistance groups, whatever it may be, their tribe, their mag, their team, their security team, whatever, you will end up in a group. I don't care how many times you say you won't. You absolutely will end up in a group. You may be in a group of refugees. You may be in a group of partisans. You may be in a group of guerrillas. You may be part of the auxiliary. You may be part of the underground. You may be in a group of POWs. You may be in a group that's hidden in the subway, which is being used as a bomb shelter right now in Kiev. You're going to end up in a group. So do yourself a damn favor and do it now. Build your group now. So when conflict comes, when struggle and strife and heartache comes, you're not trying to figure out, do I trust these people in the midst of rockets falling from the sky? No, you know you trust these people because you do life together. Those are my 7 lessons from Ukraine thus far. And that's the entirety of the brief for today. If you're one of those people that jumps off when I talk about how to support the show, this is your cue. Skedaddle, beat feet, have a blessed day. I'm going to pay my bills now. Regarding paying my bills, you have 3 days left to get the Ungovernable t-shirt from bearindependent.com. 3 days left. After the 28th of February, you cannot get them anymore. And I will remind you that after sundown tonight through sundown Saturday, we observe the Sabbath, and so does our websites. So do our websites. Bear Independent and Refuge Medical. So you will not be able to get them after sundown Friday through sundown Saturday. So be patient if you're trying to get your hands on those. But 28th of February at midnight, they're done. They're gone. You'll never get them again. So you have 3 days left. If you haven't ordered one, go ahead and order one. And understand also that if you have ordered one, these are pre-orders. There has been an overwhelming response to the popularity of this shirt, the Ungovernable t-shirt. And there's a husband and wife team that makes these shirts. There's 2 of them. And they are scrambling to do their best to provide expedient service with the utmost quality. And so understand this is a pre-order, okay? But go ahead and get your shirt, get your name. You got 3 days left to order a shirt. If you already ordered one and you want to order a second one, you got 3 days left. They are already shipping now. The first orders are already shipping now, and my guess is we're going to be well into March before all of them ship. Next, your promo code for refugemedical.com is Bear Nation. Bear Nation, one word. That gets you free shipping on everything in the store. And that's not an insignificant savings when you're looking at things like mass casualty kits, the Mac 4, the Mac 8, the Stomp Bag, buckets, the Crash Kit and the Smash Kit, hell, even the Adventure Kit. It's not an insignificant savings. So make sure you're using promo code Bear Nation when you're at the store for your free shipping. And that also helps us track on my end as far as how many of y'all in the Bear Nation are engaging at the store. So use that code. I had a phone call with the Vice President of North American Rescue yesterday concerning supply chain logistics. I'm not lying to you, and I'm not trying to scare you into buying anything. But I'm telling you, point blank, supply chain has been a thing thus far, and it's not getting any better. It's not getting any better. And so if you want to get a kit, get a kit. We're at about a 4-week fulfillment time on Bearfax right now, but I promise you, if you order one, you will get one. SOB kits, small to black kits, we have those in stock. They're shipping quickly. We have a few adventure kits left in stock. We have a few stomp bags left in stock. We have smash and crash kits in stock. The bare minimum is in stock. And so you'll get a very good quick turnaround on those. Buckets, wound care buckets for long-term preparedness. We have those in stock. Bearfax have been incredibly difficult to keep in stock, and bless y'all and thank y'all for supporting our small businesses. And so refugemedical.com. Supply chain, it's a thing, and we struggle with it as much as y'all struggle with it. So HSA and FSA, everything in the store at refugemedical.com, HSA and FSA eligible. So, be sure to use those things as well. And lastly, refugetraining.com. I get constant questions from all of y'all. When are you going to come to my town and train here? You know, I want to take the Responder 1 4-hour March algorithm class. When are you going to do the level 2 class, CPR and AED in a tactical setting in my town? When are you going to do the level 3 force on force? When's the next essential responder class, 2-day class? It's all at refugetraining.com. And so check out the dates there. There's like 14 or 15 dates up at refugetraining.com. And if there's a class within a half a day's drive or a quick flight for you, go to that class. We have a very large country here in the United States of America. We trained over 1,000 people in 2021 with Refuge Training, going all across that country. We've got 15 dates up currently all across that country. And we will add more if we need to. But if there's, you know, I see it all the time, like, oh, well, there's a Dallas class, but I live in Fort Worth. I'm not going to the Dallas class. I'll wait till they do one in Fort Worth. Negative. Go to the Dallas class. I'm in southwestern Louisiana. When are you coming here? Well, we have a class in Houston. You should go to that class. Then, you know, if you're in the upper Midwest, we have a class in North Dakota. That's your class. If you're in Central Texas, we have a class in Waco. That's your class. If you're in the mountain regions, you need to go to the Utah class. If you're in the Northeast, you need to go to Philly. We're not going any farther north or east than Philly, okay? That's about as close as we can get to Jersey without being in Jersey. So check it out, refugetraining.com. And if you have a private group, you know, your church security team or your mutual assistance group or your small business or your construction company or your whatever, email sales@refugetraining.com. And if you have enough people, we will put a class together just for you. So with that, thank you for supporting the show. Shout out to the patrons, patreon.com, search for Bear Independent, $5 a month, over 2,000 exclusive pieces of content there that have never seen the light of day here on YouTube. Stay frosty with Ukraine. Are there a lot of threat indicators? Absolutely. Should we be afraid? Absolutely not. We are commanded to fear nothing. Thank you for helping me pay my bills. Thank you for supporting our small businesses, which will allow us to employ the people that we love so they can earn a meaningful wage and support their families. 33 lives saved to date, and that doesn't include all of the mighty works the Father has allowed us to do with our ministry and our outreach. And so I am in a constant state of humility and amazement at what the Father can do when we willingly show up and participate in his will. I pray y'all have a blessed Sabbath.